at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow.
Third members' motion, legislating for the regulation of working hours. Members who would like to speak in the debate, please press the request to speak button. I now call upon Mr. CHEUNG Kwok-che to speak and move the motion. Mr. CHEUNG Kwok-che. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in drawing lots, I got the chance to move a motion in the first meeting of this council. And I immediately decided to move the motion on legislation on regulating working hours. The administration said that it would provide a report in June this year, but it failed to honor its words. The study was undertaken by Donald Tsang in the 2010 policy address. I'm worried that Leung Kwok-hung would say that that was another leftover by the previous government. He had got a lot. He has got enough troubles, and therefore he would not take up the responsibility. And the wage earning class will therefore continue to suffer. There shouldn't be any more delay on this study. I move the motion to study the regulation of working hours to force the administration, the new term of the administration, to conduct a study and give an answer to the working class. The administration has to do a lot of catching up. Last Saturday, a social worker, my good friend, moved to Canada. He had 30 years of experience. Last year, he just passed 50. 7 years ago, he withdrew from the senior management post in the social welfare sector. We discussed the changes in the past few years. We lamented the change since the year 2000. The administration introduced a block grant or lump sum grant and a number of contracting out. The social service sector suffered or has suffered seriously. And the colleague withdrew from the front line simply because of the heavy workload and also long working hours and heavy work and pressure. Life shouldn't be like that. That's really correct. Life shouldn't be like that. For those who joined the social service after the year 2000 continue to suffer. We are now asking young social workers to join us, and they are working overtime. They have little time to rest, and their family lives are affected. What is more tragic is some have been working for 10 years, and yet they have the same salary, and they really don't want to, they really can't raise a family. A social worker told me, asked me when would there be standard working hours. That is, in fact, a miniature of the whole working situation of all the people in Hong Kong. Because of lack of planning, the administration just turned a blind eye to all social problems. Now, my good friend is a member of the Social Workers Union. He is very experienced, and I was reminded to continue the fight for standard working hours and minimum wages. Minimum wage. Now, the introduction of minimum wage is a small step forward in terms of employment or labor welfare. As for standard working hours, this should be the first item on the legislative agenda. I urge the administration to introduce legislation on regulating working hours, and the bill should include a weekly standard working hours and also standard overtime pay. Now, we visited South Korea last year to study the implementation of standard working hours and Korea's experience in this regard. Now, we had a motion debate after the visit, and I said that when we introduce standard working hours, we should make it suitable to our system and our local culture. And nobody asked for fitting the mold from overseas countries into Hong Kong context. The issue of standard working hours is a very complicated issue, and it has far-reaching implications on our economy. Employers, employees have different views. These are the cliches, and these are excuses. The administration has got used to that and has got used to resorting to these words. I believe he will say the same. The response is just a waste of members' time and the community's resources. The South Korea visit report shows that Hong Kong and South Korea rose, had the economic takeoff because of the development of processing industries, and later the South Korea has become one of the NIE4. Now, Hong Kong and South Korea embarked on different routes of development. Now we have long working hours. South Korea is able to, in stages, shorten working hours to 40 hours per week, and overtime work should not exceed 12 hours. They were able to do it within 7 years' time. In 2004, 2,392 hours, and then in 2010, total number of working hours per year reduced to 2,193. That is people-oriented governance. Employers, employees gave undertaking, the employers give undertaking, and that working hours will be further reduced. The timetable is set in 2020, 1,800. Now, their economy has not gone into recession. GDP rose from 21,000 US dollars, and this people-oriented governance is not something because of the benevolence of the power that be. It is because of their democratic system. And they have a very strong call for regulating working hours. So do we. According to the ILO report in 2008, there are two concepts. One is normal hours working limit, and that is what we call standard working hours. Another is maximum working hour limit. Now, in regulating standard working hours, there is a need to limit overtime work. Even if there is overtime pay, overtime work cannot be unlimited. In many countries, there are already laws for standard working hours. In Asian countries, which are in similar situation of that of Hong Kong, have standard working hours such as Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. And the standard working hours are around 40 to 48 hours per week. In Europe, North America, and Australasia, and other developed countries, the standard working hours are usually 40 per week. UK, Denmark, and Germany do not have standard working hours, but they do have the maximum working hours capped at 48 hours per week. Some Latin American countries and African countries, such as Egypt, South Africa, Cuba, and Brazil, have standard working hours and maximum working hours. A human resource company last week published the Hudson Report Hong Kong. The theme was the working hours of Hong Kong employees are the longest in Asia. More than half of the people interviewed work more than 51 hours per week. And Hudson Hong Kong's general manager reminded us that long working hours doesn't mean high productivity. Now, we ask for standard working hours and overtime pay not because we are lazy, we are mean. In this society where the pace is very fast and people are going after profit, people really don't want to offend their boss and work overtime. As a result, there are a lot of family problems. And there will also be chronic diseases. So standard working hours means regular work and rest, and there is time to spend with the family. That is a family-oriented policy. Young employees will have time to conduct further studies, develop their hobbies, help the disadvantaged, so as to have a meaningful life. Mr. Deputy, when minimum wage was first introduced, the labor sector started promoting legislation on standard working hours. The employer representatives were worried about the adverse impacts of minimum wage. They were strongly against that. But the imagined problems of minimum wage have not occurred. SMEs are fully aware that the problems with their business is not high wages but high rents. I know that legislation for standard working hours will have to take into account its feasibility, and that means a standard. That means setting a right standard, and whether there will be exemptions and how can competitiveness be maintained. Professor Chiu of the Baptist University said in a study that 810,000 people in Hong Kong work more than 9 hours per day. 1.2 million people worked more than 50 hours per week. The problem is imminent. We may not be able to catch up with Australia and have a cap at 38 hours per week or 35 hours per week as France. But we are a world-class city, and we should try to be the place in which the place where workers are most happy. We need the support of the business sector to have legislation on standard working hours. We need wide discussions. Instead of having discussions in phone-ins or in this council, we should work on the basis of the the discussion on minimum wage. The administration should introduce a bill, start the process, and drop a roadmap and a timetable. And we shouldn't miss any opportunity to lay the foundation for this important task. I beg to move.
Mr. K.K. Fung. Mr. Deputy, since the introduction of the minimum wage, it wasn't really the end of the world as suggested, and there was no mass layoffs, and there was not any negative impact on the market. Hundreds of thousands of low-paid workers did enjoy a pay rise. They were the forgotten lot. Today, they have greater choices, and they have greater bargaining powers. They have seen an improvement in their lot. I will be moving a motion later on to seek an increase in the minimum wage level. The minimum wage is the core of the labor movement. In a free market, we acknowledge the dignity of the workers. The standard working hours is really an important aspect of the labor benefits. We have to look at the treatment of the low-paid workers, and we have to make sure that there will be good benefits. The ADPL and other labor organizations will certainly seek better working hours, this would achieve a better work-life balance for the workers. I don't think the government can escape this reality. Mr. Deputy, on the issue of standard working hours, we've been wasting a lot of time. We have wasted the health and the time that the workers can spend with their family members. The business sector has been trying to resist that. They suggested that this would be at odds with the free market principle. It would be detrimental to the business environment. All these arguments were advanced when we talked about the minimum wage. I mean, these are real threats. They talked about layoffs and also businesses going under. I mean, all these arguments don't have a leg to stand on. Mr. Deputy, the functional constituencies are in existence, and we have missed a lot of opportunities. We need to establish a good communication channel. We have to look at all the exemption areas and so on. All these should be discussed in detail, but we haven't quite started with this yet. Mr. Deputy, during the election process, Mr. C.Y. Leung talked about minimum working hours, and he said there would be a committee to be formed to look into this. Now, the chief executive's attitude has been very, very non-committal. Maybe he tried to stall the matter and secure the support of the FTU. Workers are high-paid or low-paid. They have to work long hours. According to ILO's suggestion, the average working hours are 40 hours. And there were statistics to show that in Hong Kong, the average working hours are way above that. And according to 2011 survey report, in some sectors, the working hours are really enormous. In the catering trade, extended to 55 hours on average. The Hong Kong-style cafe, the hours can be 60. Security guards are 66 hours. Mr. Deputy, these may show the hard work of the Hong Kong workers, but the other side of the coin shows that the employers are taking advantage of the goodwill of the workers and make them work overtime, which is detrimental to their work-life balance. The people are working in such exceedingly long hours, and they don't have time to establish good family life, and they don't even have time to do exercise and to look after their own health. Not to mention creating work-life balance. In many places, they have already started with standard working hours. I think we can take a leaf out of the book of many other countries. The manpower panel looked at South Korea. We can learn from their experience. The government can activate the tripartite discussion as soon as possible. There should be a framework agreement to be reached. In South Korea, they brought in the standard working hours in phases, and that would reduce the burden on the employers. They started with 1953 from 53 hours to 44 hours in 2011. And in 6 phases, they from 2000 to 2011. They brought it in phases. They have shorter working hours, and for labor-intensive industries, there was an impact, and they were allowed more time to phase this in. And all these progressive bases should be learned from Hong Kong to Hong Kong. The process of creating standard working hours from enacting legislation to the implementation, there must be a lot of resistance. The vested interest must offer resistance. But if we're pulling in the same direction, if we work in the interest of the workers and to make sure that there will be corporate social responsibility, the minimum working hours is something that we can expect. We have hit a snag from the time the study started. In his policy address, the chief executive, Mr. Donald Tsang, talked about studying the minimum standard working hours. We thought that he was trying to stall the matter, and he was trying to pay lip service to this idea. Now, with standard working hours, the government failed to live up to its undertaking and offer anything to LegCo. Mr. Deputy, Mr. Matthew Cheung, the SLW, should offer us a clear account. Are they trying to stall the matter, or are they trying to issue a limp message to the business sector that there is nothing to worry about because it would take a long time for this to happen? I think the government is encouraging the business sector to exploit the working class. So my amendment today is to urge the government to live up to its pledges and come up with a study report in relation to minimum working hours so that we can have a clear timetable without any more procrastination. We have to send a clear message to the business sector that the minimum standard working hours is around the corner. Thank you.
Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Mr. Deputy, this is the first time I speak in this chamber as a legislative member, and this is also my first amendment in this council. The issue is very close to the hearts of the FTU. Through this amendment, I want to move forward a more in-depth more in-depth discussion on standard working hours. With the hard working of the people of Hong Kong in the 70s, Hong Kong's economy had a takeoff. The employers at that time were honest. They gave overtime pay to their employees. Hong Kong is now an international financial center, and now we see people working overtime without overtime pay. I want to ask why the protection given to wage earners is lagging far behind to neighboring territories. In Singapore, the working hours per week is 44, and working hours per day is 8. And overtime pay is 1.5 times of basic salary. Taiwan has similar arrangement, 8 hours per day and 84 hours per 2 weeks. As for South Korea, which is a bit further away, in 2011, they cut weekly working hours from 44 hours to 40 hours, and annual leave raised to 25 days per week, and overtime pay 1.5 times normal pay. Although working hours are set at different levels and implemented at different times, their experience have shown that legislation of standard working hours has no adverse impact on their economies nor employment. Workers have a balanced life. The quality of workers and the community at large has improved. Yet the business sector in Hong Kong is not aware of that, has abused the fighting spirit of the people of Hong Kong and tried to squeeze every drop of effort from their employees. Working hours are longer and longer. The people of Hong Kong are not able to enjoy their family life, have leisure, and have time for further studies. That affects their mental health. That also increases grievances. Whether you are white collar or a blue collar, you have long working hours. That's indisputable. According to the CNS Department statistics in 2011, some trades like security guards and catering workers, their hourly working hours more than 60 hours. And in the service industry, such as those working in homes for the elderly, supermarkets, or real estate agents, they have to work more than 50 hours per week. This is a very huge number. After work, the employees need time to travel home and take a break. The time they spend with their families will only be just 1 or 2 hours. How can there be a good family life? And a good family life includes looking after one's parents, having social activities, having friends, going out dating, and raise a family. And they also have no time to engage in leisure activities so as to recharge. Long working hours is not only a problem of the junior employees. The white collars also face the same problem. Those working in banks told me that on Saturdays they had to go to the streets to do promotion or they had to do telemarketing, promoting credit cards, investment funds, insurance products. But these extra working hours were not counted for overtime pay. In order to save their rice bowls, they continue to work overtime without pay. Doing overtime pay doing overtime work without pay is a normal arrangement now. And whether you do overtime work is one of the factor for considering your performance. And that is an erosion of personal life. The ILO has all along been promoting 40-hour working week. And how many people can have that if there is no standard working hours? Mr. Deputy, the FTU is of the view that with the implementation of minimum wage, the next step for the administration to do is to implement standard working hours. The two have to go together in order to protect the workers. Up till now, the administration is just stalling on standard working hours. Everything is proceeding at a snail's speed. The report on the study of standard working hours has yet to be disclosed, and the administration is just passing the buck with regard to implementing standard working hours. We urge the administration to care for the workers and take the lead and to conduct a comprehensive consultation on this topic. There should be a consensus. The administration should work towards a consensus so that the bill can be introduced in this council within this session. So my amendment is as follows. There should be a committee comprising the employers, employees, the officials, and the academics, and views will be collected and try to drive at a consensus and identify the problems of different industries and iron out the details. This will enable the policy to meet the actual situation of the industries and find a suitable balance. The implementation of standard working hours should be a regular subject for reporting to the panel on manpower so that we know the progress of standard working hours and the roadmap and the timetable. The administration should not be dragging its feet. Promoting legislation for standard working hours is a major task of the FTU and is also my major task. This amendment is just the beginning. We will continue to work hard. We will spare no effort until there is a satisfactory answer for all the workers in Hong Kong. I hope the Secretary understands the difficulties of the workers and the wish of the workers, and he should introduce a bill to regulate working hours. Thank you.
Mr. Chung-kai. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I would like to thank Mr. Cheung Kwok-che for moving this motion. I support the original motion. I am moving this amendment in order to enrich the content of the original motion. Now, in the original motion, it's about standard weekly working hours, and we are proposing 44 hours, and then overtime pay at least 1.5 times the normal pay, and then maximum weekly working hours we are proposing 60, hoping that this will help comply with the family-friendly policies. In fact, 60 hours cannot be regarded as family-friendly. In fact, in countries in Europe, the maximum weekly working hours is merely 48, so 60 is really quite excessive. But of course, they're talking about an average of 48 hours per week for 17 consecutive weeks. We're proposing an average of 60 hours maximum per week. So we are really erring on the relaxed side. And then, of course, we hope that gradually, progressively, the maximum number of weekly working hours will be lowered to a level in line with international practices. Now, if we just propose 44 hours as the standard working hours and 1.5 times the normal pay for in relation to overtime pay, then a situation may arise whereby a person has to work overtime consistently. It's just that he will get 1.5 times normal pay for his overtime work. Now, nowadays we emphasize work-life balance. And so even if there are standard working hours, if there isn't a maximum number of weekly working hours, then work-life balance cannot be achieved. As my colleagues have pointed out, in South Korea, the standard working hours is only 40. In France, in some European countries, it's just 30 odd. For example, 35 in France. Of course, I'm not saying that we are comparing ourselves with France. And I understand that in the U.S., deducting lunchtime and the standard working hours are 44.3 on the average, 44.8 for men, 42 for women. So we are of the view that there is room in Hong Kong to gradually reduce the standard weekly working hours. Now, as my colleagues say that in the retail sector, the average working hours is 51, and then for the security guards, 54. My colleagues have already given members such figures. I want to say something about problems brought about by modern technology. Now we all have smartphones, and many employees are given BlackBerries by their employers, and so employees are now actually working anytime, anywhere. Many people replying to emails and working night and day using their mobile phones and BlackBerries, and there are employees who have to have conference calls at home at night. So when the government collects data, the data may relate to the number of working hours in the workplace. But then what about work done at home, outside the office? So I think we really need to define what is meant by working hours. So, Mr. Deputy, So there are three main points in my amendment. Standard weekly working hours 44, overtime pay at least 1.5 times the normal pay, and then maximum weekly working hours 60. Now I would like to comment on the amendments. Concerning Mr. K.K. Fung's amendment on clarity, I will support that. And then the amendment moved by Mr. Kwok Wai-keung of the FTU on procedures, on preparation for legislation, and on setting up a dedicated committee comprising representatives from the government, employers and employees. I again will support this amendment. And then we are unable to support amendments moved by some other members. They include amendments to be moved by Dr. Chang, Mr. Michael Tien, and Mr. Kenneth Leung. We cannot accept the deletion of the reference to the introduction of a bill on the regulation of working hours within this legislative session. Now, if you read the Hansard, you will know that in the last term and in the term before last, there were debates and discussions on standard working hours. In the last term, the government said that it would work on the statutory minimum wage first and then standard working hours. This legislative session has just started. We still have 8 to 9 months to go, and so there should be sufficient time for the administration to present a bill to LegCo. So if you delete the reference to introducing a bill within a legislative session, then the government will again drag its feet. And then it is said that we need to deal with definitions on working hours, overtime work, and we must have regard to the actual working environment and the needs of different industries and so on and so forth. So I can imagine that when such a bill is tabled in LegCo, we'll have to meet a lot of different deputations and organizations. So we will be dealing with in great detail the concerns mentioned in Mr. Michael Tien's amendment. In fact, in many European countries, they have clear definitions about working hours in their laws, and there are certain trades or industries which can be exempted. And so if we can't have a bill in this legislative session, then we may not be able to complete the scrutiny of the bill within this present term of the LegCo. Mr. Deputy, the DP has been fighting for standard working hours and maximum weekly working hours for a long time. And so we'll support some of the amendments, but not all. And then concerning Mr. Leung Kwok-hung's amendment, the number of standard weekly working hours should not exceed 40 hours. Of course, that would be an ideal situation. But then we have taken into account the present situation. Most employees are working 44 hours, and also we understand that progress will need to be gradual, and so we are of the view that we should legislate first and then we can gradually lower the standard working hours. I can remember that when the statutory minimum wage was implemented, and in the initial few weeks there was a lot of discussion on whether the lunch hour would be counted in towards the calculation of minimum pay. And so when we legislate for standard working hours, again, we have to address all the relevant details. Thank you.
Ms. Ann Chiang. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Well, we've just been through the debate on national education. I think we need a mutual agreement for things to be undertaken. The national education has been going on for well over a decade, and it wasn't until a consensus was reached that it was launched, and still it hit a snag. Now, let alone issues that we haven't any consensus on. Mr. Deputy, I used to be operating a factory. I mean, there are many factory operators who would offer 1 times the normal pay for overtime, and it was 20-odd years ago. In factories, workers got paid on a piece rate basis. It would be easier to work out a more objective way. But for clerical workers, it would be rather difficult to quantify the work that they undertake, because they're not paid on a piece rate basis. So how should we work out the overtime pay? On holidays or after work, when the employers ring up the employees to issue an email to the clients, would it be regarded as working hours? Or during the office hours, when the employees log on to the web to do personal business, or if they log on to the personal website, I mean, would they have to have their wages stocked when they get found out by their employers? So I think we have to tread carefully in this regard. The employers would have high expectation of the workers, and they might find out what the workers are up to during the office hours. So I believe that this would worsen the labor relations in Hong Kong. That may not be a good thing for Hong Kong as a whole. There are some political parties that suggest that wages should be paid for overtime work. I think that this is in conflict with the family-friendly policy. That there is a suggestion that working parents are working exceedingly long hours and they sacrifice their family life. But on the other hand, they propose that overtime pay should be offered to encourage people to work longer hours. I think this is really contradictory. As a matter of fact, we've conducted some surveys. We found that some workers would much rather have day offs in lieu instead of getting paid. So I think that on the question of standard working hours, how do we work out the details? We have to do the consultation properly. We should not repeat the example of national education. We may be debating this for decades and still getting nowhere. Also, if I may turn now to the mental aspect, I've talked with many workers and they're very loyal to their employers. When it's time for them to go home, and if the bosses are still there, they know that the bosses might need the help any time, and so they will stay behind. Some would feel that it would not be appropriate to leave before the bosses because that would not be in the good book of the bosses. Now, they stay behind after office hours. And would that be regarded as overtime? Or in that kind of scenario, should we get rid of them? Should we send them home from the offices? It would be rather complicated to come up with a clear definition. So the DAB would like to move this amendment that there should be a dedicated committee comprising representatives of employers, employees, academics, and the government. There should be such a specific committee that will consult all the stakeholders on the idea of standard working hours. We hope that the stakeholders can, in the context of the committee, explore all the implementation details of the minimum working hours before enacting the legislation and coming up with the relevant guidelines to implement the committee's decisions. Mr. Deputy, I'd like to tell members a story. I just graduated from university. I was just an employee of a company, and people were very happy with overtime work because they got paid 1 point times. But the monthly rated workers were not happy because at that time, however long hours, however many hours they work, they don't get paid extra for their overtime work, but they get double pay at the end of the year. They get bonuses at the end of the year. Such being the case, I mean, these are the benefits they don't get immediately. And I talked with the boss at that time, and the boss felt that he should boost the morale so that this would encourage greater loyalty. But the thing is, it would be very difficult to work out the details for monthly workers unless we turn all the workers into daily rated workers. So the boss decided that those working overtime will be given time off in lieu, and the year-end bonus would be increased. The boss and the workers were happy with the result. So the story goes to show that the employer and the employee do have common interest. We have to be accommodating. We have to be understanding. Both sides should be sensible. The minimum wage committee came up with a consensus after consultation that this $30 hourly rate is a combination of the consensus. We hope that there should be a platform so that the employers and employees will be able to come up with minimum wage, minimum standard working hours consensus. The DAB, in relation to Mr. Pt1's motion, Mr. K.K. Fung's amendment, Mr. Kwok Wai-keung's amendment, Mr. Chung-kai's amendment, Mr. Kenneth Leung's amendment, we would abstain from voting on them, because at this point in time there are a whole host of problems that are still outstanding. The community hasn't forged a consensus regarding the timetable for the enactment of legislation. I mean, it would be too early to talk about enacting legislation and the timetable. Regarding Mr. Michael Tien's amendment, the ideas are basically similar to ours, so the DAB will be casting vote in favor of that. Thank you.
Mr. James Tien. Mr. Michael Tien. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I move the amendment because I have strong reservation towards the original motion. I studied the legislative paper, and I found that regulating working hours involve a lot of details. The discussion should not be simplified and ignore the importance of these details. Otherwise, regulating working hours will only be a slogan. Now, there are two major points in the motion. First, for any trade, for any industry, the standard working hours should be the same. Number two, the working hours should be calculated on a weekly basis. I don't think that is feasible in regulating working hours. Together with the new People's Party's SME policy group, we consulted the SMEs and professionals. The majority of them have misunderstanding towards regulating working hours. They are of the view that without the permission of their employers, employees working overtime should be compensated across the board. And some employers are of the view that the definition working hours should be clearly made before there is any legislation. So they will not support the bill if they do not get the answer. Now, I'm not against legislation on working hours, but we must clarify the following issues. Number one, the unit of accounting. How many hours per month or how many hours per week to suit the needs of different industries. The motion proposed calculating working hours on a weekly basis. I have strong reservations. Many SME employers are of the view that calculating working hours on a monthly basis is a better arrangement. That will make the overall working hours more flexible and help to fit with the cyclical demand for manpower. Some even suggest the unit of calculation basing on a quarter or 4 months in order to fit in with the seasonal demand. In overseas countries, the UK based the calculation on a 17-week period, and the average working hours per week is no more than 48. If employers and employees mutually agree and sign an agreement, then with the maximum is calculated on or rather the maximum is 52 hours per week. The European Union allows its member countries to be flexible, and the unit of accounting is usually 4 months. Now, if there is an across-the-board cap on working hours for all industries and trades, would that be feasible? In the UK, those engaged in public transport services have working hours very different from other trades and industries. Therefore, for those working in sea transport, air transport, and land transport, there are different standards. This is not something invented by me. This is an overseas experience. The third point is the definition of working hours. Several members have spoken on that, in particular Ms. Chiang. The definition of working hours is very complicated. For the healthcare workers, the disciplined forces, their standby period, should that be counted in the working hours? During non-designated working hours, working at non-designated places, say for example, having a telephone conference at weekends at home, journalists writing up articles at home, would that be counted? What about traveling between home and workplace and answering telephone calls of their bosses or superiors, or replying emails of their bosses to their bosses and superiors? Should it be counted? And the fourth question is even more difficult. There is no discussion on exempted trades and the scope of exemption. According to the relevant legislative paper, in Western countries such as France, Ireland, United States, and also in Asia, such as Singapore and Japan, executives and the management are exempted. Then there's a problem. The management and executives of a company, where can we draw the line? As long as you have somebody reporting to you, then you are a manager or one of the belonging to the management. That will be very controversial. Many SME representatives of the view that these questions have to be answered before they can decide whether they can support the legislation on regulating working hours. Mr. Chung-kai mentioned my amendment many times, and it seems that he agrees with the devil in my amendment. He does not support my amendment because he wants to draw a deadline. But isn't it contradictory? Since it is very complicated, and he mentioned them all, and yet he draws a deadline. Now, if we can't solve the problems, we just legislate, and then it will be a chaos. If a policy has not been thought through and is implemented, it will be a chaos. This council should provide the flexibility and room for discussing regulating working hours. I hope you will support my amendments. Thank you.
Mr. Kenneth Leung. President, this motion affects the well-being and the quality of life of over 3 million employees in Hong Kong and their family members. Please, Mr. Leung, clip the mic to your lapel. In fact, in most places and regions, including the mainland Japan and many EU countries, they legislate to provide for standard working hours, and the level is about 40 hours per week. Hong Kong is really lagging far behind in this regard. When we talk about standard working hours, we are not only, we don't only have in mind those involved in manual labor. I understand that the white-collar employees are also very concerned. Now, between May to June, our alliance conducted a survey, and about 88% of accountants in Hong Kong worked more than 44 hours. Some work for 41 to 50 hours a week, and 39% work over 50 hours a week. So we can see that in the professional sector, overtime work is a very serious problem which needs to be addressed urgently. In overseas countries, they need to address 5 issues in relation to legislating for standard working hours. First, should the calculation of working hours be on a weekly basis? And in setting or formulating standard working hours, should there be flexible arrangements based on the characteristics of the trades and industries concerned? For example, for those providing emergency service, doctors, nurses, those who need to work shift duties, and those who work in certain professions, for example, lawyers, those accountants, or those working in investment banks. Is it that these should be exempted? Is it that they should enjoy? There should be certain exemptions, and then the number of hours per week is also a controversial issue. In Belgium, it's 38 hours, and the Netherlands is 60 hours. In the Netherlands, it's 60 hours. But the 60 hours can be changed through collective bargaining. And then, of course, we want to protect those involved in manual labor. But then what about managers? What about those in the management? Should they be covered or should they be excluded? So this is another controversial issue. And is it that standard working hours is a uniform concept? What about people with special needs? For example, pregnant women, people or employees who need to take care of family members who are elderly persons or who suffer from poor health? Is it that we should have standard working hours specifically for these groups of people? And then what's going to happen if employees work more than the standard working hours? What sort of compensation should there be? Cash compensation or leave compensation? And then if it's cash compensation, what should be the OT rate? Now, in fact, we can look at the very diversified experience in other countries. Now, let's look at Singapore, which is very similar to Hong Kong in many ways. Now, standard working hours apply only to employees earning less than 2,000 Singaporean dollars per month. And then in countries where, like Luxembourg, where banking and finance are the pillar industries, the maximum working hours per week is 40 hours. In other words, a maximum of 8 hours per day. But then if employers and employees can come to an agreement, then the weekly working hours can be flexibly lengthened or extended. But then the working hours per day must not exceed 10 hours, and the weekly working hours must not exceed 48. And then look at Ireland, which is a knowledge-based economy concentrating in the services, high-tech industries. Now, the weekly working hours are rather long, 48 hours. And the law stipulates that if an employee has worked continuously for 4.5 hours or 6 hours, then there is a mandatory 15-minute and 30-minute break, respectively. So in other words, standard working hours should be formulated based on the unique economic structure and cultural background of a place or of a country. You can't just borrow wholesale from another place or from another country. So if we are to legislate towards standard working hours, there must be very prudent consideration. There must be extensive consultation. There must be ample discussion. And it's going to be a very complicated piece of legislation, and so the government must do its work very seriously. But of course, that's not an excuse for the government to drag its feet. Yes, we understand that the bill is bound to be complicated, the legislative process is bound to be complicated. Still, we can learn from the experience of other countries or places. So I think for the health and well-being of the affected employees and their family members, there should be a clear and a reasonable legislative roadmap and timetable laid down. I suggest that the government should set up a dedicated committee to carry out a study as soon as possible. There should be public consultation within this legislative session, and there should be a bill tabled in this council in the 2013-2014 legislative session on the regulation of working hours. Concerning Mr. CHEUNG Kwok-che's motion, Mr. Kwok Wai-keung's amendment, and Mr. Chung-kai's amendment, I think I can support these amendments. This is because these motion and amendments contain a very clear timetable. And with regard to Mr. Michael Tien's amendment and Ms. Chiang Lai-wan's amendment, I will abstain from voting on them. Secretary for Labor and Welfare. President, I would like to thank Mr. CHEUNG Kwok-che for moving this motion. I would also like to thank Mr. Pt1, Mr. Kwok Wai-keung, Mr. Chung-kai, Ms. Ann Chang, Mr. Michael Tien, and Mr. Kenneth Leung for moving amendments to the motion. I want to emphasize that the government fully understands the concern of the labor sector in relation to working hours in Hong Kong. I do understand that many employees are working rather long hours. Then, as to whether we should legislate to regulate working hours, understand that there are diversified views in the community. Now, in order to address this issue properly, the CE in his manifesto promised to follow up on the policy studies carried out by the last term government on standard working hours. A dedicated committee comprising government officials, employers and employee representatives, academics, and members of the public will be set up to study how to take forward the issue of standard working hours and the situation with regard to overtime work. Standard working hours is an extremely complicated and highly controversial issue. A lot of employees will be affected, and there are a lot of social and economic implications. If we are to legislate to regulate working hours, then there may be far-reaching implications socially, economically, and also on Hong Kong's competitiveness and the employment situation here. And so we must be cautious, we must be prudent. And before we come to a conclusion on this very important issue, the community must be able to have in-depth discussion and thorough understanding of all the relevant issues. Employers and employees, as well as the community, must be able to achieve a consensus on the policy objectives before we can further take forward the directions and the details. So we are now studying the overseas experience on the implementation of standard working hours. We understand that in formulating the policy objectives and the measures, we need to take into account the social and economic development, the cultural background, and also the wishes of the employees. For example, some employees may want their working hours to be reduced so as to protect their occupational health and safety, and to help them achieve a better work-life balance. There are other employees who hope that they will be able to get better protection with regard to remuneration for overtime work. So different policy objectives may give rise to different systems on working hours. In order to help the community grasp this very complicated issue, in order that there can be more constructive discussion in society, the government has started policy studies on standard working hours. We hope that there will be an objective and solid foundation for further discussion. These studies include overseas experience, overseas systems, the collection of data on the situation in Hong Kong, and also impact assessments on having standard working hours in Hong Kong. In fact, the report has already been submitted to EXCO. We will present the report to the LAB next month, and then we will give a full report to the manpower panel, and we will also give details about the dedicated committee to the panel. So it's really premature to, at this stage, talk about the legislative timetable for the proposed bill. So I will give a more detailed response after I have listened to members' views and comments. Thank you.
Mr. Leung Kwok-hung. Well, before I speak, I'd like the Secretary to clarify this. Ms. Ann Cheung's amendment is that the government has announced the establishment of a dedicated committee. So is the Secretary effectively saying that this dedicated committee will be formed? Because that would make a difference to what we're going to say. I'd like to seek clarification. Secretary, would you be prepared to clarify? Yes, Mr. President. What Ms. Ann Cheung says in the amendment is not sufficiently truthful. The committee has not been set up. The Chief Executive, Mr. C.Y. Leung, said that he would follow up on the study of the previous administration and set up a dedicated committee. This hasn't been set up yet. according to the timetable, by next month we will be submitting a report to the LAB and then make a report to the Manpower Panel, and then we will announce all the details. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung. Mr. Lee Chuk-yan, point of order. If the amendment is not in line with reality, does it still stand? Well, members are free to decide on whether they support the amendment, and they can decide which way they vote. Of course, they will decide on the basis of whether the amendments are truthful or not. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, I don't think this is fair. When you looked at the amendment, I think you should have verified the truthfulness of the amendment. But if the amendment is not sufficiently truthful and you still allowed it, then this is really a laughing stock, and that would undermine the credibility, and that would be detrimental to our debate. Your ruling, please. Mr. Leung, if I have to verify whether the amendments are in line with truth, then it would be imposing tremendous burden on the Secretariat, and that would be very controversial. Please continue. Mr. Tam Yu-chung. Ms. N. Cheung's amendment quoted from the newspapers. It was quoted that the CS would be within the Poverty Commission set up a committee. I mean, would that be the case? Secretary, would you be prepared to clarify? Mr. President, according to the newspaper, a committee would be set up under the Poverty Commission. It's not about minimum working hours. It is about the task groups looking into poverty. It's not about the standard working hours. I'd like to make it clear that in the course of a debate, there may be members who suggest that certain elements in an amendment are not in line with truth, and members are free to point that out. Those members who are accused of making amendments that are not in line with truth are welcome to make a response. So I think that this debate mechanism will ensure that members will not be casting their vote on the basis of any misunderstanding. So, Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, please continue. Mr. President, I'm not asking you to deal with the point of order, but what you said will not prevent similar things from happening in future. It is likely that the wordings in the motion or the speech the members deliver may not be in line with truth, and that should not be a good practice. I think they will have to be meticulous in working out the wording. I think you ought to make sure that members are telling the truth in their amendment. Mr. Leung, your point is very clear. Please speak to the motion. President, I think this will make a difference to the way we think about this. I thought that the government has decided to set up such a dedicated committee, and certain parties or certain members may be privy to the news, and we were kept in the dark. But I might be reprimanding the secretary more. But I mean, then I was told that the dedicated committee has been set up, but the secretary has already made a clarification that this is not truthful. Mr. Secretary, we called for Mr. Eddie Ng to step down because he evaded many issues and he shied away from many issues and failed to reflect upon the issues and failed to face up to the problems. I've known you for so long, Mr. Secretary. I can't say that you're not doing anything at all. Within 3 months, you have done all these work in relation to the OALA. Now, it was in the 2010 policy address that this was mentioned. It was said that with the implementation of the minimum wage, there were people in the community who feel that it is time to start a policy study in relation to standard working hours. But this subject is a controversial one and complicated one. We have to tread carefully. We have to balance the different interests of the community. I've asked the SLW to study the matter. That's what I'm paraphrasing from the policy address. But this study has been going on for so long, and you said that this report will be submitted to the LAB. Now, the LegCo has never been consulted. Why is that so? Last year or before, we set up a subcommittee and we went on a fact-finding mission to South Korea to find out more about standard working hours. But you never talked to us, never consulted us, and you said a study has been conducted, which will be submitted to the LAB, and you think that you've done your job. When you conducted the study, have you ever considered all the problems that we highlighted? That I don't know. Under the Chung administration, the policy address pointed out that this is a controversial matter and very complicated. I am concerned that you studied the complexity of the problem, and at the end of the day, we might end up with absolutely nothing. Over the past year or so, we were kept in the dark as to why the administration refused to talk to the council about the way forward, and this is wholly regrettable. Now, on the question of minimum working hours, standard working hours, I heard from members that they were in support. I didn't hear any objection. It's all a matter of technicalities, and we have to thresh out the technicalities. I think it's only right and proper. When we introduced the minimum wage, many people highlighted all these technical problems, and I would tend to agree with that, that there are many problems. Other than the criteria of mapping out the minimum wage, we have to deal with the disabled and so on. I mean, the problems are no less with regard to standard working hours. Now, if the government has decided on this way forward, I mean, it would be very important. The government is evading the issue without giving us a clear path ahead of us. We can work out, we can offer our views regarding the details. I'm not sure whether you're going to do it like this. If this is the case, then will be another story altogether. We are kept in the dark. So, Mr. Secretary, you should not just present the report to the LAB. I think you have to present the report to us so that we know about the way forward. The working hours are exceedingly long in Hong Kong, topping the chart in Asia. Now, this is detrimental to work-life balance, family life, and so on. And this is detrimental to economic development. Because all these long working hours would be detrimental to productivity, and this will become a burden on the community. People may tend to fall ill if they overwork, and the medical bill will be staggering. And there are all these problems. So I think that the government should tell us the principle of laying down the standard working hours and then thresh out the details. We should not drag our feet anymore. We have to act now. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung. would like to present this document to the Secretary. I mean, I've got this here. People working long hours with no time to go home. They're working very hard, and there is no work-life balance and no family-friendly policies. This is a paraphrase of this document of Mr. Wong. I think this is really a description of the workaholics. I hope that the Secretary will speed up the enactment of legislation on standard working hours. I don't want to dwell on theories, and let me tell you 3 facts. I'm telling the Secretary why there is such an urgency and importance to expedite the legislation. First of all, in this legislative election, after the election results were announced, I left the venue. I got a report, a complaint on my pager. Now, one of the contract staff of the electoral office called me to say that LegCo should enact standard working hours as soon as possible in its new term. Now, these contract staff worked through the night to do the counting of votes without any extra pay. I hope that all members sitting here, you must have understood how difficult it was to count the votes. The EAC staff didn't have any overtime pay, but they may have time off in lieu. I hope that the contract staff of the Electoral Affairs Office will know that I will be moving a motion, the second motion in this term. I hope that you would work it out with the administration and give some assistance to the contract staff of the Electoral Affairs Office. Second, Mr. President, I'd like to tell members why is it so important to enact legislation for standard working hours. The trams running on Hong Kong Island, the staff members are subject to exploitation. They used to work 8.5 hours, and the overworker will get paid extra 1.5 times. But since 2002, the company cut corners, and they extended hours to 9. And the staff protested vehemently. Last year, the company made an adjustment and make the threshold at 8.5 hours. Beyond that, they would get over extra pay. But the Hong Kong Tramways, in relation to these overtime pay, tried to cut corners. Starting from 2002, they asked the workers to fulfill the 10-year threshold before they would be entitled to the 1.5 times extra pay. Otherwise, they would get 1.25 times extra pay. So they have to have a minimum threshold of 10 years before they will be entitled to 1.5 times extra pay. I mean, if they started working at 50 and retire at 60, then all these 10 years of work, they will get overpay of 1.25 times. This kind of exploitation, I mean, would it be agreeable to members? We have bosses from the business sector here. Do you subscribe to this idea? Does the administration subscribe to this idea of exploiting the tramways workers? I hope that the Secretary for Labour and Welfare should face up to this issue square. I mean, this is exploitation, true exploitation. Third, even more ridiculous. Recently, there was a banking union that received complaints from the staff. Starting from April this year, there was a bank that formulated standard working hours. I think we should give this bank a round of applause. It sounds really a wonderful idea, but the standard working hours are not worked out on the basis of each day. They're worked out on the basis of each month. The supervisor will have to inform you the time that this will be counted. I mean, this will only be counted if you have to turn up for work. If you stay at home, there will be no overtime. And within a month, if you chalked up certain hours, you would get paid overtime. And this is called the standard working hours. What is even more ridiculous is that if someone calls in sick, if female workers take some maternity leave, then all these time off will be considered in violation of the provision of standard working hours. Not only do they not get any overtime pay, the overtime pay for the particular month will not be considered. So all these three examples, Mr. Secretary, show that the government has the responsibility to get on with legislating for standard working hours quick. Now, you said that you will go to the LAB next month, and then the Council will have a workaholic secretary. I hope that you would speed up the process. You really have to put your foot down and get this done as soon as possible and done well. Otherwise, the employees will be subject to unreasonable exploitation. I hope that the business sector will have a look at the situation as well.
Mr. Chen Paul. Thank you, Mr. President. Somebody said that minimum wage and standard working hours are twins. Since I support minimum wage and minimum wage has been legislated, it's time to study minimum standard working hours. The majority of the business sector will not oppose improving their treatment the treatment of employees if possible. But because of uncertainties arising from minimum wage, many businesses are facing difficulties. Madam Chiang and Mr. Michael Tien have already shared experience with us. What we need to do is to remove the uncertainties, find a solution that is acceptable so as to achieve a win-win situation. In 2009, I moved a motion urged the administration to implement a new working culture, and I got the endorsement of the whole council. I moved the motion urging the administration to encourage employers to introduce measures so that employees can pay attention to their work and family life and try to counterbalance their work pressure. According to the CNS department, Hong Kong employees have a median working hours of 40. For those who have long working hours in the catering industry and retail, they have average working hours of 51 hours per week. More than half of the respondents said that they work more than 51 hours. This is the highest in Asia. We need to have balance of work and play, work and family, and that will help to foster harmony. Working too hard is in fact not healthy. We are moving from a sick society to a healthy society, and that takes time. We need time to change the mindset of employers and employees. We have implemented the minimum wage law for quite some time. The community has adjusted to it. Many people have benefited from it. Many are concerned about long working hours now. The next step is moving towards standard working hours. As said above, introducing standard working hours will increase the burden of employers, and there will be difficulties of implementation. But standard working hours do benefit the employers. a healthy employee will help to enhance productivity of a business. Although with standard working hours, costs will increase, but productivity will also increase. I hope the administration can introduce tax concessions in order to make standard working hours palatable. The setting of minimum wage is focused on how the minimum wage should be set. But for standard working hours, we need to consider the standard working hours, overtime pay, the minimum work, standard working hours per week, and also the arrangement of opt-out, and also the other uncertainties. Many of the businesses are SMEs in Hong Kong. Flexibility is very important. Standard working hours should take into account the provision of flexibility. SMEs may not have adequate resources to flexibly deploy their employees to meet fluctuations in markets. Different trades have different special features. It may be easy to implement standard working hours in manufacturing industries, but it may not be possible for the service industries. The standard working hour system is rather complicated. It takes a longer transition to avoid adverse impacts or excessive adverse impacts. We need to conduct further studies on all these. With regard to standard working hours, there is a need to consider the views of stakeholders. We need to set up a special committee comprising representatives of the employers and employees to find a solution and consensus. Today, members have made suggestions on specific members have made specific proposals, but I think it is too early to propose any options. This is the best way is to let the ad hoc committee or to look into the details. Thank you. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. Thank you, Mr. President. Minimum wage has been implemented. The business sector understands fully that regulation on working hours will come. And the businesses do want to give a reasonable treatment to their employees so that they can work effectively and be competitive. But it's no easy task to have a suitable piece of legislation for regulating working hours. There will be far-reaching implications. Detailed studies have to be conducted, and the policy can only be implemented after a wide consensus. One should not underestimate the complexity of formulating standard working hours. Balance between work and family life is very important. The standard working hours will have a bearing on the initiatives of employees and also competitiveness of businesses. At present, we in Hong Kong, we have many trades and industries. Their special characteristics are very varied. For certain industries, it will be difficult to calculate standard working hours. For some other industries, it will be easy. Say as for other industries, just like doctors, teachers, journalists, so on, accountants, it's really difficult to set their working hours. The setting of standard working hours is no easy task, which is as simple as the original motion. The DAB, therefore, has moved an amendment. And we propose to set up a special committee, and it should make up of representatives of employers, employees, government officials, and academics. The committee should have a strong representativeness, and it has to solve a number of issues. What should be the standard working hours? Should it be across the board standard, or will there be variation between industries? Can employees refuse working overtime? Will there be overtime pay for overtime work? And what is the level of remuneration? And how should that be set? Should employees be allowed to sign contracts to opt out? And if there is voluntary overtime pay, overtime work, can there be exemption for certain trades and industries? How can contracts be enforced? Mr. President, there should be detailed studies looking into every details with no stone unturned. And then there should be an overall framework. Even if there is an overall framework, there should also be problems of implementation. We have yet to deal with the pay for lunch as far as minimum wage is concerned, and many employers are criticized of being unscrupulous. And the businesses are therefore scared with the implementation of minimum wage. Concerning standard working hours, there should be full consultation, full explanation. Let the community know the pros and cons of standard working hours. There should be adequate channels to reflect the views of all the industries and trades. Mr. President, I know that the regulation of working hours will have far greater impacts than the minimum wage. The SMEs are less competitive. They will face increasing costs, increasing labor costs, and the difficulties of making suitable and detailed records. That will also add to the cost of the SMEs. Employees will have longer resting hours, and there will be a shortage of labor for SMEs. In view of uncertainties of the economic situation, the regulation of working hours will add great further burden to the SMEs. The committee on standard working hours should pay more attention to these areas. Mr. President, implementing standard working hours is no easy task. The community is still looking into these problems. I and the DAB have an open mind. We want to listen to more views. The administration and the community at large should be given a chance to express their views. Conflicts should be reduced. Policies should be fine-tuned. Thank you.
Mr. Poon Siu-ping, President. Today is the first motion in this new legislative term. And I do hope that there would be discussion being started on the standard working hours. I'm a new member from the labor sector. I'd like to state my position regarding this particular issue. The Chief Executive, Mr. C.Y. Leung, in his manifesto, said not much about the labor issue, but specifically, Chief Executive mentioned the legislation for standard working hours. This is what he said. Following on from the work of this administration, there will be a committee to be formed comprising employers, employees, academics, and the government to study the various details on regulating working hours and also the details about the situation. Basically, I agree that this legislative route that we're going to go down, but there is no timetable regarding the enactment of legislation. There is no clear commitment on the part of the Hong Kong SAR government. There is a lack of measures to relieve the long working hours on the part of the workers in Hong Kong prior to legislation. My union is very clear in our position. In June 2010, the Legislative Council endorsed Ms. Lee Fong-ying, FLU's amendment regarding standard working hours. And this was the first time the Council endorsed a motion regarding the creation of standard working hours. The Chief Executive, Mr. Donald Tsang, instructed the LWB to embark on study on the issue. Now, the study is the culmination of our hard work, all those who are concerned about standard working hours. It is never easy to pursue any labor matters in Hong Kong. I don't underestimate the resistance in the process. In July last year, at the Manpower Panel of the previous term, they conducted a fact-finding mission to South Korea to learn about the experience in that country. And this is a rare opportunity for us to learn from other countries. I've looked at the membership list. There were no members coming from the business sector or the employers' representatives. And this says a lot about the attitude on the part of the employers in Hong Kong. I urge the chief executive to set up a broadly representative organization. I don't underestimate the complexity of the problem. In South Korea, they started in 2004, the 40-hour per week work week, and they brought this in 6 phases. It took them 7 years for this to be implemented. How long is Hong Kong going to take? How can we implement standard working hours? I believe that most of us who support standard working hours are prepared to engage in sensible dialogue. The community does have room to pursue discussion in order to forge a consensus. At this point in time, I am open-minded about all the proposals, all ears about all the proposals from various quarters, but the government has to show sufficient commitment to this and come up with a timetable. And the government should bring us in this direction. Dr. Kwok Wai-keung, President, I'm grateful to Mr. Peter Cheung from the Labour Party for moving this motion today. I've heard a lot of comments from the business sector and the secretary. I mean, the only word I can sum this up is procrastination. They come up with all these different reasons to stall the matter. Standard working hours has been a subject for debate for so long. In 2003, the LAB subcommittee came up with some guidelines. I mean, the secretary must be aware of that. They urged the employer and the employee to formulate standard working hours in 2003, 9 years on. The working hours in Hong Kong is experiencing no improvement. The situation is getting worse. In 2005, Oxfam conducted a study. It was found that 80% of the workers in Hong Kong found that they were working exceedingly long hours. 60% of the people polled suggested that there should be immediate legislation. 2005. It's been 7 years. I've got no idea how long this debate has to go on, but C.Y. Leung, before he got elected, like many members alluded to, mentioned this in his manifesto, but I don't think this is the way, this is the direction we are going. The union members or the FTU said that this is an important issue. Maybe by the time we cast a vote tomorrow, we may end up with nothing. Now we have so many functional constituency members. They've always voted against any motion that look after the labor interests. The key player is the government. The government promised a committee to be formed, but the government has been procrastinating on the matter. I think it goes to show that C.Y. Leung's team is letting the disadvantaged workers down. I heard from the business sector members all these problems that they face, and they're having a hard time. They have to look after the bottom line, and it is difficult for them to enact legislation for standard working hours. But we have to bear in mind that in many jurisdictions, and they started in the last century, Australia, Japan, South Korea, they've already done that. Hong Kong is branded as an international city with good per capita income. The government is trying to create a quality city, but in terms of protection for the workers, in terms of working hours, these are important issues. The government is really shying away from these issues. Just last week, we were talking about the boat collision near Lam Island. We extended our sympathy. Now, the coxswain of the Hong Kong Kowloon Ferry, he worked 24 hours and had 24 hours off. As a doctor myself, I have to say that everybody needs to be sufficiently rested before being able to make a proper judgment. I don't think anyone should accept a 24-hour shift. Now, we had so many, such a large death toll. If we had standard working hours, then the sea smooth history could have been rewritten. I don't think we should be pretending to be sympathetic. If anything happened, we talked about making improvement. But when it comes to standard working hours, and you advance all these arguments against it, citing difficulties. When we talked about minimum wage, the arguments being advanced are no different to those that we are talking about today, and they said that with $28, so many people will be losing their job. Mr. Michael Tien was here, and they advance arguments like this. Business are going under, and people are laid off, and so on. All these arguments did not come to pass. We didn't see mass layoffs, we didn't see collapses of businesses, but the grassroots workers did enjoy a better pay. We are hoping the Secretary is trying to alleviate poverty. You are able to achieve that. Poverty, these days we talk about not just the money, we talk about family life, family-friendly policies. We have to make sure that workers or working parents or family members will be able to be with their families. Without these standard working hours, I'm sure that would be very difficult to achieve any protection for them. I can't see a lot of difficulties there to define the standard working hours. We have the business sector representative who talked about the problems with defining the working hours for the clerical staff. The phone calls that they make will be difficult to define. There are many labor unions, labor organizations that have advanced very clear guidelines in this regard, and these are not excuses that should be concocted. I hope that the administration and the secretary would not be letting the public down. They should come up with standard working hours at the right time. Thank you. I support the motions.
Mr. Yu Xiu-wing. Mr. President, I represent the tourism sector, and I will look at the issue from the tourism perspective. Tourism industry is one of the 4 pillars of our economy. The tourism industry covers the hotels, the tourist agents, the retail, the entertainment sector, so on and so forth. There are more than 1,600 tourist agents. They are mainly SMEs. In recent years, there has been tough competition. Tourist agents, be they big and small, are facing high costs and low profit. Low tour fees show that the business environment is very tough. Different industries have different characteristics. If working hours are regulated at an appropriate time, it would be difficult to control costs and fuel labor disputes. Say, for example, tour leaders who are bringing tour groups overseas, they have to be working 24 hours. Say during the air trip, during the tour, the tour leaders will have to work, and there must be a common understanding on all the definitions. And sometimes even the tour leaders are taking a rest. They may receive calls and inquiries, and should that be counted as working? And there are also MICE travelers, and they may contact travel agents even at midnight when, say, they are not able to get on a plane get on a plane overseas, or when their booking of hotels has a problem overseas. They will call the tourist agents even at midnight. And how can you count the working hours? There aren't enough coach parking spaces, and there is serious travel congestion. Drivers cannot get off work at appointed hours. How can you calculate the working hours? Most of the tourist agents in Hong Kong or travel agents in Hong Kong are SMEs. The implementation of standard working hours will only escalate operating costs. Big companies, of course, can transfer the cost to consumers. Small travel agents will close down. This will take away opportunities for establishing one's business. This will only increase the that is only benefit the big travel agents. The travel agents may have to reduce workers' benefits. This will only lead to reduction in pays and also reduction in competitiveness. Regulating working hours will help to enhance quality of living. But there are a lot of problems. When should it be implemented? How can standard working hours be set for different trades and industries? How can consensus be reached? There's a need to assess situation. If it is not handled appropriately, it will only cause disputes between employers and employees. It will cause division in the community. It will harm Hong Kong's economy. At present, the economy of the world is experiencing recession. The economies of Europe, North America, and Japan are getting worse. And the growth rate of China's economy has slowed down. Singapore and other developing countries are attracting foreign capital and improve their business environment. If we don't understand this, if rents remain high, operating costs remain rising, inflation keeps rising, escalating social conflict, it will only deter foreign investors. At the end of the day, people's living will be adversely affected. In view of all these uncertainties, It is not the time for legislating on working hours. Thank you. Mr. Lam, Thai 5. Thank you, Mr. President. Hong Kong practices capitalism. It respects the free market. It's going after profits. Many business people are being criticized for putting money first. In seeking economic efficiency, businesses should protect the interests of workers, uphold justice, and make sure that people can make a living. Now, according to the experience of minimum wage legislation, there should be adequate consultation to the community, numerous negotiations between employers and employees in order to reach a consensus. Legislation to regulate working hours require more time for negotiation and consultation. It cannot be done overnight. The legislation has far-reaching impacts on Hong Kong's overall interests. The Labour Department has completed its policy study, and the report will be submitted to the LAB and this Council. Before having the report, it is not appropriate to set a deadline and force the administration to introduce a bill within this session. This will only reduce the room for negotiation and discussion and escalate confrontation. Legislation has to be timely. In recent years, the world economy is not performing. Hong Kong is small and is an open economy. It cannot protect itself from all these adversities. And legislation will only increase the burden of SMEs. Although unemployment rate of the United States recently declined to 7.8% and QE3 was implemented, it is still far from economic recovery. And the sovereign debt crisis of Europe cannot be solved overnight. And in Greece and Spain, unemployment rates are more than 25%. Mainland's economic growth has slowed down, and IMF forecast that economic growth in China will be less than 8%. SMEs have told me that orders have declined, cost is rising. SMEs face a bleak future. In view of uncertainties of the world economy, is it the best time to implement legislation on regulating working hours? One has to think twice. Can the SMEs afford that? You need to consider the matter rationally. Health and family life of employees are very important, but legislation on regulating working hours is problematic. Inflexible arrangement will only increase costs of operation with SMEs, undermining their competitiveness. If SMEs have little room to maneuver, then workers will have a smaller chance of wage increase or promotion. There are more than 1.2 million employees of the SMEs. And the SMEs are the pillars of our economy. And if the SMEs suffer, Hong Kong's economy and people's livelihood will certainly suffer. We are in the same boat. If we ignore the poor economic situation and the difficulties of SMEs and hastily rush into legislating on regulating working hours, everybody will stand to lose. Mr. K.K. Fung's amendment retains the original motion's requirement on legislation on introduction of the bill within this year. We should not do that, and we should not set a deadline and require the administration to set the bill. I therefore am against it. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung's amendment proposes the setting up of an ad hoc committee comprising representatives from the employers, employees, government officials, and academics, and study the legislative details. I am against that because there is not the time for studying legislation. As for Ms. Cheng's amendment, of course, against legislation. The administration has yet to set up an ad hoc committee, and therefore I should oppose that. Even if there is a consensus in the ad hoc committee, it's not adequate. There must be a consensus in the community. Community interest overrides. Mr. Chung-kai and Mr. Leung Kwok-hung's amendment sets out requirement on minimum on standard working hours and also overtime pay. There is no consultation, isn't it? Just by imagination, even if the figures are based on the experience of overseas countries. These countries are different from Hong Kong. We cannot just copy the practice of other countries. So I will oppose the amendment. Their amendments. As for Mr. James Tien's amendment, he asked the administration to fully consider the trades and industries before introducing the bill. Since there is no outcome of consultation, how can there be a bill? After consultation, we may find that legislation is not feasible, and there is no need to introduce a bill. As for Mr. Leung's amendment to extend the deadline by a year, that is also a precondition and should be opposed. If we need continuous development, we need cooperation between employers and employees. The proposal has far-reaching implications. We have to treat cautiously. Please care for the SMEs as well, not just the workers. Thank you.
Mr. Tang Ka-pew. Thank you, President. Members, particularly those from the business sector, question whether legislation is the solution or is the only solution. I, from the labor sector, will tell them yes. Now, we understand that it's a complicated issue. It affects all trades and industries. Now, concerning the minimum wage, the discussion started before 0203. In 0203, the government implemented a minimum wage for the contracted workers, and the government said that the statutory minimum wage should not be implemented, and a voluntary implementation by employers would be a preferred option. But then that proved not to be feasible. So how can you expect standard working hours to be implemented voluntarily by employers? In fact, members from SMEs, members from the professional sectors, I believe there is a consensus among them, and that is if the working hours are too long, health will be affected, family relationships will be affected. Now, some may say this is not the right time to legislate for standard working hours, as because there are a lot of uncertainties surrounding Hong Kong's economy, and some members say that they need to consider the difficulties faced by SMEs and also the big business groups. But of course, big business groups can really vote with their feet, so to speak. Now, this formal discussion on the statutory minimum wage started in 2004, and the statutory minimum wage was implemented only in May 2011. In other words, 7 years. And there were two economic cycles during the 7-year period. So what is the right time for legislating for standard working hours? There are bound to be lots of changes because of increased globalization. But the fact is that in Hong Kong, in general, working hours are excessively long, and we all understand the adverse effects of excessively long working hours. So why is it that we can't legislate to regulate working hours. Then it is said that discussion is needed, discussion in the community is needed. Now, in this chamber, it's not really not enough to have each member speaking for 7 minutes, and so that's why we all want to have a dedicated committee set up so that there can be more thorough and detailed discussion. And we also hope that we can see the bill as soon as possible. We want to have all the definitions, we want to have all the details. For example, what is meant by working hours? Do working hours include lunch time? And then what should the OT rate be? Can employees say no to OT work, or is it that so long as there is an OT compensation system, employees have no choice but to work OT? Now, if we don't have a bill, then we can go on discussing forever. We won't come to any conclusions. And so I think we need to have the bill so that we can discuss the concrete details. Now, we understand that the formulation of standard working hours is a very complicated task. Now, I know of a single mother living near me in Tung Chung. She has a daughter. She has complained to me many times. Now, this mother is a helper at a high-class fitness center. And she complains that she has to work 6 days a week, but then she can't take a day off on Saturday or on Sunday. Now, on weekdays, she works 9 hours. During weekends, she has to work 11 hours, and she can only take leave on weekdays. But then on weekdays, her daughter has to go to school, and so she can't go out with her daughter. She can't take leave during weekends, so she feels very aggrieved. Now, during weekends, she, in order to earn money to support her family, has to play with children from well-off families, and she has to leave her daughter alone at home. And then on weekdays, her daughter has to go to school, and so she can't really go out of her daughter. So is it that? So we're talking about, we're not merely talking about wages. We're not merely talking about earning money to support one's living. We're talking about whether people can have work-life balance, whether they can address their different needs, since Hong Kong is really an affluent place. And then concerning OT pay, should it simply be 1.5 times across the board? In some places, if one has to work on Saturdays, then one can get 1.7 times, and on some days 2 times. So, in fact, we can have a lot of discussion on the details concerning, say, OT compensation. So you can see that with regard to the amendments moved by the labor sector, we do not mention specific numbers. For example, working hours, OT rates. We just hope to stimulate discussion. We hope that there can be a timetable for legislation. Now, we always say that we need to compete with Singapore. Now, Singapore has already got legislation for standard working hours, and so we should also do the same. And also, South Korea is doing very well in its economy, and in South Korea, they have standard working hours. And so I hope that employees can work to make a living. At the same time, they can have time to spend with their families. I want to seek clarification. It's a very important point. Is it that what you said has been misunderstood? Is it that the secretary said that what you said did not tally with the facts? Correct. I allow you to make the clarification because your clarification may affect the rest of the debate. Yes, thank you, President. In my amendment, I said that given that the government has announced the establishment of a dedicated committee on standard working hours, I want to say that the source of such information is in fact the 6 newspapers for me: Oriental Daily, Sing Tao, Ming Pao, Ms. Chang. I think it will be sufficient for you to give a brief clarification on how the secretary or other members who spoke after you misunderstood you, because some members, including Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, are of the view that an announcement has not been made concerning the establishment of a dedicated committee on standard working hours, but in fact the announcement was made on the 12th of July this year, and that was reported in a number of newspapers. So they said that all the newspapers got it wrong. Now I've got these papers. Ming Pao quoted Mr. Matthew Cheung as having said that a dedicated committee would be set up, and the headline said that Matthew Cheung said that a dedicated committee would be set up. I think you've already clarified the situation. Do I need to continue with the clarification? I just want to make sure that Mr. Matthew Cheung has said that a dedicated committee will be set up. And also President Leung Kwok-hung and Lee Cheuk-yan, Ms. Chang, you've already spoken. So you think my clarification should come to an end? Now, according to the rules of procedure, you can give a clarification, a brief clarification on why you have misunderstood, in what respect, and I think I've already given you the opportunity to do so. Thank you, President. Ms. Alice Mack. Thank you, President. Of course, it's good that there is consensus in society, but I don't know since when consensus has become, or the lack of consensus has become an excuse for the administration to delay things. The government says that it can't do anything because of a lack of consensus in society, but if the government does nothing, then when can there be a consensus in society? Now, members from various sectors, in particular members from the business sector, are of the view that there are different trades and industries in society, and it's very difficult to define whether OT work is voluntary, and it's difficult to reach a consensus, and there is no consensus at the moment. Now, when there was legislation on the statutory minimum wage, trade committees were set up for different trades. Trade committees discussed the uniqueness of the trades concerned and whether there should be exemptions or certain special arrangements. So lack of consensus should not be a pretext for delaying the legislation to regulate working hours. And some members I have this misunderstanding that standard working hours may induce employees to work overtime. But I want to say that we do not want to see employees having to work overtime without getting any OT pay. Now, Mr. Matthew Cheung, there are about 3 million employees in Hong Kong. Do you want to see them working OT continuously and endlessly without OT pay? Now, employees have been subject to very unfair treatment. And so if we want to stop this situation, then standard working hours must be implemented as soon as possible. With regard to lack of consensus, different characteristics in different trades and industries, these matters should be discussed and ironed out by the dedicated committee. Yes, we understand that SMEs will be affected, so we need to study very carefully the procedures, timetable, and which trades or which job types should be exempted. But what is important is that we need to affirm that we do not want employees in Hong Kong to continue to have to work overtime without remuneration. This is important. Now, in fact, during the election period, many candidates and many members said that they needed to fight for the interests of women. They were concerned about the interests and well-being of women. Now, the FTU is fully aware of the adverse impact of excessively long working hours on working women. There are 370,000 working women in Hong Kong, and according to a survey, in fact, most of them work over 55 hours a week. Now, for the members who have said that they are concerned about the well-being of women, the interests of women, I hope that they will also show their concern about the excessively long working hours of working women. We hope that standard working hours can help working women. Between April to May this year, the FTU carried out a survey on the pressure faced by women in their daily lives. And out of the 400 respondents, 400 odd respondents, 50% of them said that they in fact faced a lot of pressure. And for the age group 18 to 39, their main source of pressure was their financial situation or their jobs, and then for the middle-aged women, they were also concerned about their financial means. So we can see that women in Hong Kong do face a lot of pressure. Now, working women need to take care of their families and their children after work. So if we make them work OT continuously, endlessly, without any OT pay, then they really will have very little time left for their families. Now, I don't know whether fellow members have heard this remark. Many people say that it's good to have a daughter because usually a daughter takes care of her parents. But then, as I've said, most working women work over 55 hours a week. And also we have to spend time on traveling to and from work. So how much time do we have for our parents and for our children? How much time do we spend at home every day? So we hope that legislating for standard working hours can help working women and also their family members. Working women are also carers of their families, and so standard working hours can benefit working women as well as their family members. And also concerning single working women, now standard working hours is very important to them. At the moment, they don't have time for social life, they don't have time to pursue further studies. So standard working hours can benefit family carers. We hope that working women can achieve a better work-life balance. Please do not use lack of consensus as a pretext anymore. So we've passed 10 o'clock, and I'll adjourn the meeting till 9 a.m. tomorrow.